The Sorting Hat wouldn't sort. James Potter sat before the reciprocators, wizards and witches who were about to go out on surveillance. Following the arrival and settling of students at Hedgewood's and a whole day's lessons successfully done, the reciprocators had gathered together at Grimwald Place for their usual weekly meeting, expecting an update from their leader. At the last moment, James Potter, sipping a cup of tea and waiting for the wizards to assemble, received a clue from Callias explaining that he would, regrettably, be unable to chair it himself and had told James the details. Lily was annoyed. How on earth can he miss the single most important meeting of the reciprocators? What could he be doing that's more important? But her ire at the situation, brought about through lethargy from her new work, that of old buildings and making them habitable by modern wizards and or non-wizards, it didn't change the fact that the head of the reciprocators would not be there and, in his stead, James would have to fill in. He had chaired the meeting well enough, receiving reports from those who had been on the ground as the Hedgewood's Express had made its way across the country on Saturday. Arabella Figg reported that she had kept several students in line at Hogsmeade Station, and Benjamin Wergs told them that 3 students who might well have drowned in the Black Lake in their efforts at boarding one of the captainless boats. James too reported that the first years and new students had disembarked successfully and had come to the part when the Sorting Hat fell silent, refusing to acknowledge the students, far less sort them into their houses. "I've never heard the like!" exclaimed Bathsheba, who, like the others, knew of the situation but had not yet had it confirmed. The hat didn't sort. What has Cleus to say about this? And Severus? James looked at his owl. No information had been provided other than what James already knew and had told them. The meeting's members looked on and Bathsheba continued, "It'd be good to have heard it from either of them, particularly with what we are doing tonight." Many nods, comments, and whispers echoed her sentiment. James closed his eyes momentarily, his mind thinking on to the rest of the agenda. He wasn't ready for this, he hadn't been prepared to chair the reciprocator meeting that evening. His evening had involved him and Lily going on duty before clocking off and grabbing a few hours sleep before work the next day. Chairing the meeting tonight required him to think and make decisions. It is Cleus's pleasure to announce that the first day of teaching at Hedgewood's has been carried out successfully. All students, both wizards and non, have had their lessons with only minor difficulties. James read from his briefing notes, classroom location, organization of students into teaching groups. Nothing like the suspected disruption that was anticipated. No resistance to the subjects, no prejudice. All in all, a success. "And what about the screening?" Maddie Moody growled his question before swigging from his hip flask. "What does our esteemed leader say about these? What are the outcomes?" Began James, scanning down. "It says that it was carried out." He read to the end before reading through again. "And that the results would be released to the students at the end of the month. They are screening for diseases, both wizard and non-wizard in origin." "A good thing," said Lily. "We don't know how magic's going to affect the non-wizards." "I suspect there is more to this," interrupted Maddie. "Do you not think that the ministry wish to uncover any half-breeds?" "If Cleus were here we could ask him," replied James Potter. "However, we can only speculate. Anyway." He looks down, hoping no more important questions or comments came his way. "Tonight James broke off and looked in the direction of the crackle that indicated a wizard was operating. "Severus, how good to see you." Molly Weasley immediately rounded one of the sofas and welcomed him warmly. "We were just hearing of the success of the school." Severus Snape half closed his eyes as the reciprocators stared. He rarely attended meetings these days. Many suspected a rift between him and Cleus. That he was here at all was a good sign, however. "Indeed. It is the reason I am here." He walked over to a vacant seat on one of the sofas but did not sit down and looked at James. "I understand your art chair?" James Potter nodded. Do you wish me to continue with the meeting? Looking down the list of points he had been compelled to cover, James looked back at Severus. Perhaps you could cover the points from Hedgewards? Asked James. I know there are several points some members might wish to ask you. I have one other issue to discuss. Indeed, replied Severus, taking the cup of steaming tea that Molly Weasley had given to him and finally sitting down next to Arthur. As I am sure you were saying, James, the beginning of the school year has been a success. We have had lessons for both wizards and non-wizards today, something which, had you put it to me this time last year, I would have said would be impossible. And yet, though early days, the strata of students in the school and the shift in teaching and learning objectives have culminated in successful lessons, happy students and a positive school. He surveyed the reciprocators, who were listening intently. All credit must be given to the staff who have met the challenge of integrating non-wizard learning into their subjects at short notice, although there have been 1 or 2 tests to our organization. We have heeded much that you, Lily, and Tabitha too, of course, recommended to us via your report, James, and I congratulate you on your dedication to the cause. Our well-being program yesterday appeared to be a success also. The students undertook lessons identifying prejudice and how it made no difference about people's abilities or lack of them to what they could learn. Older students undertook academic programs of study, Severus concluded, sipping his tea, before adding, are there any questions? What problems have there been with wizard prejudice to the non-wizards? What have you done about it? Severus Snape glanced over to Sturgis Podmore, nodding in acknowledgement. We will carry out the school policy with regard to discrimination, which is that under no circumstances bigotry would be tolerated. There have been no reports, I am pleased to say, of this, other than a couple of isolated incidents. Sam, for example, he looked at Lily and then at James, was adept at dealing with those that have occurred. An asset to the school, he added approvingly. It's a pity positive couldn't be used to describe what we'll face tonight, growled Mad-Eye Moody. I'll be sending some your way, James, there's no doubt, before it's over. What about the sorting hat? Bathsheba asked, changing the subject. She too knew the night would be difficult and she narrowed her eyes in Moody's direction, wishing he hadn't reminded her of what they would be having to do, again, that night as keepers of the peace. I've yet to get to the bottom of the sorting hat, it has been entirely uncommunicative. I've left it in the hands of both my predecessors and Minerva. Finally, as Nigellus was giving it a good talking to as I left. Mick Mullen reported that the fail-safe sorting procedure had been a boon, commented James. A good thing the students weren't left without their houses. But not to be sorted. Bloody hell. Severus, I bet there were loads of cheesed-off students. I know I would have been. Anaxagoras Jones, a plump wizard, ruddy-faced and bearded, banged his fist on the arm of the chair. A small puff of dust erupted from the fabric. What house did the sorting hat put you in, Nax? Asked Kingsley, turning to the older wizard. Gryffindor, he growled. And the house you would have chosen? Gryffindor. Brave, chivalrous, courageous. What other choice is there? A silence fell, and Anaxagoras Jones, a descendant of one of the reciprocators' pioneers, nodded and harumphed. Was the method really the same one that founders chose? Benjamin Wergs turned his attention back to Snape, unfolding his feet at the ankle before folding them over the other way. Oh yes, replied Lily. When the founders were alive, the students sorted themselves based on the qualities of the houses they most valued. She sighed. If only I'd been there to see history in the making. The room fell silent for a few moments. It would seem that Cleus's policy had paid off. The students were being educated, the staff were happy, and there had been little if any conflict between them. It was a pity that the situation in towns and cities around the countries, where protests from conjurists, who had taken to the streets, though low level, had been boldly vocal in their opposition to the so-called equality policy had been enacted. Severus, what of the medical tests? None of the other students have been tested for diseases. Can you explain Cleus's thinking here? It was Lily who had posed the question. Severus nodded in acknowledgement. Indeed. Cleus proposed the measure not 2 weeks ago. He was concerned for the health of the students in light of non-wizard students coming to Hedgewoods, as a precaution to them. We cannot morally keep them at the school if we feel that there is anything which may pose a danger to them. Equally, we felt it was detrimental to the cause to isolate the non-wizards alone, hence the request for first-year students. And what will happen to the records? What will the ministry do with them? Excuse me for the questions, Severus, I was unaware, as a parent, that this was going on. Again, Severus nodded in acknowledgement. My thanks for your questions, Lily. It is important to clarify these things. As I was saying, the only reason for students' screening was to discover if there was anything that may prevent them from being fully involved in school life. The results of the tests will be kept on school file only and released to the students. Should any students be suffering from anything of concern, they will be offered counseling and a letter sent home recommending they be removed from Hedgewoods. We would not like the students to suffer for their education any more than they will have to. A snort of laughter came from Mad-Eye, Sturgis, and Arthur Weasley, while Kingsley Shacklebolt added a "here" to Severus's comments. As to your question about notification, the parents and guardians of those involved were informed with their Hedgewoods letters. Sam is in the 6th year and as such is not subject to a medical examination. Severus got to his feet. Any further questions? James looked around the room. No, I don't think so, Severus, concluded the reluctant chair of the meeting. So, back to the other business of the evening. He looked down his list. Other agenda items. He looked up. Pensives. There have been reports, and evidence, that the new types of pensive are being used by conjurists. The main organizers use P-mail to contact those in their coven. The time and date of assembly. A wizard we arrested yesterday told the Iridris Lund that he had been messaged, told to meet in Newcastle and, with other conjurists, target the bridge. Clearly this makes our job more difficult as these wizards and witches can be called at any time, from anywhere, and as such we do not have the capacity, like with the flu network, to monitor the messages in and out yet. Close down the shop, declared Anaxagoras. Unless they let the ministry in. National security. A rumble replies, some in agreement, some merely groaning at Nax's predictable response. We can't close it down. But at this moment Cleus is in talks with the managing director of Firebolt Pensives. They've had the sense, at least, to take the wizard's addresses for all those sold. He looked at the sheet, then back up. Nothing prevents the original owners from selling these on. We have the measure, temporary at least, but something, that we may confiscate any pensives that we have until we can get someone from the Department of Mysteries to look into their magical programming and usage. Hopefully some sort of tracking device or code can be developed. If only we have Tabitha, sighed Lily, she'd do it in a heartbeat. No she wouldn't, laughed Sturgis Podmore. The time she would take on it would be seconds, to her at least, but we might get it by Christmas. But it would work, and do the job it needed, insisted Lily. Dabs is nothing if not efficient. Have you heard from her of late, Severus? No. She is still behind the veil. Then we must rely on Cleus to do his utmost. He is nothing if he is not dedicated to his work, Cleus Lupin, intoned Kingsley. Now, if we are finished, shall we get the rotas organized? As a wizard, they got to their feet. Severus Snape looked at James's expression, one of reluctant custodianship. Both knew that this was not the last item on the agenda. As eager as we all are to be on our way with our duties tonight, There is just one more item, something that is all the more pressing considering its personal nature to us all. He had the room. Molly sat back down by her husband, on the arm of the chair. Bathsheba stopped mid-rise and Benjamin pulled her back down again onto the settee. Silent. Wide-eyed. Has anyone heard from, or seen from Henrietta recently? She's in Europe, James, replied Lily. She went there early July. A muttering of agreement reinforced Lily's point. Have you heard from her, Lily? Has anyone? James looked around as his wife and several other reciprocators shook their heads. And nor has Callias. He went to visit the European Ministry yesterday in order to discuss national security. He had owled Henrietta and asked for a meeting. When she didn't turn up, he went to the address that the Parliament building in Strasbourg had for her. The place was deserted, he had to operate in, and by the looks of things she hadn't been there for a long time. A rise in the volume of the chatter made James pause awkwardly. He knew the news of Henrietta's, disappearance, would provoke concerned discussion, and it had. How far has Cleus got with his investigation? Tunks, from the very back of the room. He's made it official, I assume? James shook his head. Not as yet. I think, before he involves Europeaners he wishes to investigate himself. But he urges anyone who has had any contact with Henrietta to speak to him. Any information might help. And now we can go? Asked Kingsley, once the chatter had died away. I for one am keen to get on with it tonight. As the meeting drew to a close, Severus nodded to James. Callias will be grateful that you stepped in. What else could I do? He's not here, and we needed briefing. If you ask me, he's taking on too much, Severus. He's sorted the school, he's got the ministry to run, the conjurists to look after, and now Henrietta's got herself lost and dash. You think that's what's happened? You know what she's like. Flaky. She'll probably arrive here tomorrow as if nothing at all's the matter. He walked with Snape to the fireplaces around them. The reciprocators got themselves into their respective groups and took their lists, reading them before disapparating, in twos and threes. 88,888,888. The sun was shining through the stained glass window that was adjacent Septimus's bed. Through the curtains of the four-poster bed, which hung loosely around it, Septimus just had to pull them across and pretend that they were in last night, before Julian popped up underneath and scared him on purpose, did little to shield his eyes from the sunlight. He sat up, and then dragged the heavy covers from himself, pulling on yesterday's clothes, grasping the letters. Hopping around, Septimus managed to put on his shoes one-handed, looking around and hoping that his stamping hadn't woken up anyone else in the Gryffindor boys' dormitory at so early an hour. He had to get out to post these before school began, and it took him until he was at the back of the fat lady's picture, which was immovable despite his attempts, to realize that, were he to get past the portrait, he would have no idea how to get to the owlery, much less what he would do there. Crawling back through the passage, he stood in the common room and looked down at the names on the letters. Callias Lupin was written on one and on the other Cecilia Lupin. Essentially they both contained the same information. They told his uncle and his mother about his first few days there, about his first day of lessons, about how he was sorted, or rather, he sorted himself, into Gryffindor. They told their recipients how excited he was about Quidditch and that the lessons they'd had so far, spell writing, English and history of magic, history had been all right and herbology, plant biology had been cool. In Cleus's letter he had written about how he hoped his father would be better soon so he could tell him about Hedgewoods, and asked if his uncle would be able to take him to see him. He had written to his mum that though he would miss her, it was brilliant that she was helping the government with governmenty things, that he was looking forward to seeing her again, and that Professor Snape wasn't that scary. He also thanked her for his broom which he had taken for a practice fly in the grounds on Sunday when the Quidditch trials were going on, but told her he never thought he'd be good enough to play for his house. As he gazed upon the letters he turned slowly, thinking that it was probably a good thing that he hadn't got out to post the letters. They'd be out of date soon anyway and there would be more things to tell both of them. Septimus was wandering back towards the stairs when he came to an abrupt stop. Looking up to see what the obstacle was, he was taken aback at the sight of Sam Potter, grinning down at him. "What are you doing up so early, September? And where are you going?" He glanced towards the back of the fat lady's portrait, then back at Septimus, who felt a guilty look cross his face. I wanted to post these," Septimus replied uncertainly. "They're for Uncle Kay and Mum. Only you need to get past the portrait." Septimus nodded. "You're not supposed to be wandering around before 7. The caretaker, Filch, will go mad." "But even if I did, then where do I go?" He looked towards the passage himself. "I want to send them today, but I don't think Mervyn will be able to carry even one, let alone know where he's going, and dash." "Come on." Sam stepped past Septimus. "I shouldn't do this, you know, but, well." He knelt at the entrance and began to crawl before looking back at the young wizard. "So, are you coming then?" Septimus followed Sam out of the main castle doors, down the hill that lay beyond. A tower loomed in the distance. From its summit birds fluttered in and out and, as they approached, Septimus realized this was the owlery. He followed Sam up the steps that looped around the outside of the tower, realizing he should have put his cloak on, such was the bitterness of the wind. It was no better inside. "Here we are. The owlery." Sam gestured towards the owls. There was a multitude, of all species and varieties. "If you don't want to send your owl," he continued, fussing a tawny owl perched calmly with several others, "you can always use a school owl. They have a yellow ribbon around their foot." Septimus, who had been nuzzling Mervyn, turned and, ignoring the little owl's indignant squawks and pips, walked over to them. "They're much calmer than the new arrivals," said Sam, giving the one he was fussing a worm. Now that Sam came to mention it, there was a distinct divide between those owls with yellow ribbons and those without. "Ah, is she yours?" he continued, fussing Mervyn and cooing at him. Said Septimus, watching as Sam gave his owl a worm too. "He's only a baby, he'll soon grow into a big strong bird," Sam continued. "Go ahead," he added, noticing Septimus's reticence in untying the yellow ribbon and wrapping the first eater around it. "They won't bite, dash." "Much," said Septimus as he tried to retie the ribbon, snatching his fingers away each time he tried to attach his letter. "Just be quick about it," said Sam as he came to Sam's side. "They've had a few weeks of rest, probably, don't want to go out with messages," he added, deftly avoiding the nips, but only just. "Here," Sam added, giving the delivery owl a worm. They watched as the bird hopped to the nearest window ledge and, with a stretch of its wings, soared into the air. "Thanks," said Septimus as they made their way back down the stairs. When they got back to the common room they realized that several more people were up. Severus felt nervous, perhaps they'd ask where he and Sam had been. But when no one did, he smiled again at his older friend before climbing the stairs and getting changed. Reaching into his back pocket he pulled out the letter intended for his mum. He hadn't sent it, only Cleus's. Why? "It'll be out of date soon," he thought to himself. "And when I've had some more lessons I can write to her again." "Where were you this morning?" asked Julian as they walked down to breakfast. "When I woke up your bed was empty." Entering the great hall they found a place at the Gryffindor table and, as they had discovered on Sunday morning, simply had to ask the table for what they wanted to eat and it would appear in front of them. "I went out with Sam," he said. I just wanted to send the letters I'd written for Mum and Uncle K. Cool, said Julian, tucking into his porridge. You can show me later. I've written home, too. What have we got first? Septimus asked as he too ate his porridge. Arithmancy, said Julian, / mathematics. What do you reckon, adding up? Decimal places? No idea, said Septimus as Darren Black passed them. Septimus made to smile, but the boy turned his head and carried on walking. They walked down the main corridor, past the potions, chemistry classrooms and those for students who had transfiguration, science next. As they turned the corner they almost bumped into two older wizards arguing loudly with one another. Septimus and Julian stopped, staring at the older boys. One of them, Septimus remembered, was the boy who had shouted at Gaudy Springs for taking his sister's wand. The other, tall, blonde, athletic, was a boy called Jason Cruglington. They knew this as Jason Cruglington introduced himself to Crystal Leo Anderson as both he and Julian were making their way back to their compartment on the Hedgewoods Express. Jason, by his own account, was the son of a non-wizard who specialized in improving wizard and non-wizard engineering, bridges, canals, and so on to make them multi-user. Jason himself was also a non-wizard and hoped to go into the family business, his father seeing fit, and he agreeing, that an education here, at Hedgewoods, for a non-wizard would be a unique advantage. Currently however his magical education was being taught him by Fraser Blewett, who was holding his wand so close to Cridgelington that it almost went up his nose. At the sight of both Septimus and Julian, Fraser took a step back, looking past them and over to the main corridor before, taking one last disparaging look at Jason Cridgelington, stalked away. Now that's what you call friendly, whispered Julian as they hurried past the scene. Come on, said Septimus, or we'll be late. Yes, we will, said a voice behind them. Both boys turned to see Rufus Lestrange hurrying up to them. I've got arithmancy next, said Rufus, looking at his timetable. Well, not exactly next but now. But, he looked at both of them brightly, his round, dimpled face creasing into a smile and his long curly hair bobbing like maids at court to a queen. Septimus and Julian gave one another a look. I think it's up this way a bit, said Septimus politely. Then I'll come with you, said Rufus, taking a step between them. You've got arithmancy too, haven't you? He asked, peering at Septimus's timetable, upside down and under his arm. As all three of them walked together to their classroom, Julian leaned in and whispered to Septimus, at least he hasn't got his music with him today. I have, said Rufus, smiling back at them, Julian's irony apparently lost. Only it's in my pocket. The teachers can confiscate it and I don't want that to happen. An hour and a halt later, during which Julian had caused a fire when trying to predict the square of 13 and what significance it would have on their teacher's day, and the boys headed out of the classroom. It was break time. They hurried out, hoping that Rufus wouldn't follow them, and to their relief the boy turned the other way. In Julian's pocket were the cinched remains of some of his top trumps cards which had spontaneously combusted the night before when he and Septimus were playing. Forgetting about the incident, Julian said, "Want a game?" before pulling out the cards. As he did so, Thierry Henry's arm blew across the grass, shortly followed by Stephen Gerrard's head and shoulders. "Oh bother!" he exclaimed, shaking his head at the remains of his Premiership cards. "Now you'll have to show me where the owlery is. I'll ask Mum and Dad if W.H. Smith have any more and if they can send them." "Never mind," said Septimus, watching the hand of Maradona catch up with the legs of Pell. "Perhaps we can make our own up, or do some for Quidditch." "Yeah, could do," said Julian, half-heartedly. "I don't know much about Quidditch." "Do you want to go and watch the practice tomorrow night?" asked Septimus brightly. "Gryffindor and Hufflepuff are having a friendly. It's a bit like football but dash." There's brooms involved, I know that. Julian jumped down from a rock, granite, with quartz inclusions. I'm impressed. But more basalt than you can shake a stick at, round here, and they both headed towards the corridor. Now what? Asked Julian. Septimus looked at him blankly, and he added, You've got the timetable. I've already lost mine. History of magic, history, said Septimus. I think classroom 7 is this way. Straight on, I think, said a timid voice behind them. It was Arella Bluewit, who overtook them and pointed. This way. Behind her, and them too, were Gordy Springs and Rufus Lestrange. It's sod. The names, said Julian as they turned a corner. For the subjects. They could have just kept them the same, we'd have known what they meant. Would you know what astronomy was? Asked Septimus, laughing. Julian laughed too. As I said, odd. Except for astronomy. That's because your uncle wrecked the school. In front of them Fraser Bluewit stood in their way. Immediately Arella stopped, dropping her head at the sight of her older brother and stood next to him. You don't even deny it, he sneered. And, by all accounts, your mother is a nutcase too, and your father's as good as dead. Septimus stared at the boy before following his momentarily distracted gaze as Darren Black passed them by. The look on the boy's face, coupled with his acknowledgement of Fraser Bluewit and Septimus, had a pretty good idea where it had come from. Shut up, said Septimus, or I will dash. Well? Will what? Vex hex me? Yes. Julian stepped forward and was trying to eyeball Fraser. And you? You're nothing but a talentless chump who took the wrong turning at King's Cross. Bluewit held up his wand, before leveling it at Julian, his eyes darting to Septimus. No! Shrieked Arella from her brother's side. You can't dash. And I'll deal with you later. Snarled Bluewit, consorting with, his eyes darted back to Julian, wanting to say the word. You're not causing trouble, Fraser, are you? At once Bluewit's face changed from one of mangled ire to a blank canvas of innocence. From behind him a tall, dark-haired wizard in Wellington boots smiled warmly at the older boy. Professor Longbottom. No, sir. Bluewit lowered his wand. I was just asking these boys if they could show my sister where she needed to go. I'm glad to hear it. The tall wizard, his dark beard reaching only to his collarbones and plaited with fishing flies and wire, bent down towards Julian and Septimus. Mr. Lupin, he smiled. I've heard you've an interest in herbology. And Mr. Julian. Julian Scott. Mr. Scott. He looked between them. You both seem like helpful young men keen to escort this young lady to her next lesson. Course we will, said Julian. It's Arella, isn't it? Arella nodded, refusing to look at her brother, who appeared to Septimus as if he might explode. This way to History of Magic, history, said Professor Longbottom, gesturing the way down the corridor. Ahead of them, when out of sight of the professor and Fraser Bluewit, Arella looked at them both before striding on ahead. Phew, said Septimus, that was close. His wand looked as if it was ready to kill you. Mum says it's not wands that hurt people, it's wizards, said Julian as he picked up speed. Time was rushing on and he was keen not to be late for the second lesson that day and suffer the ignominy of points off their house. Even so. I don't know how to defend yet, even. We haven't got defense against the dark arts, practical defense till tomorrow. They ran the rest of the way, bolting into the classroom. The students that had been on time looked around at Septimus and Julian. We're for it now, whispered Julian, taking the last two empty chairs near the front. They needn't have worried about being late. It took a further 3/4 of an hour for Professor Binns to arrive, Sam Potter escorting him,